Hey folks, this is a video I've wanted to make for a long time, mostly out of convenience because whenever I share little snippets and clips of stuff I'm working on, demos, works in progress, either on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, inevitably there's a question about the workflow, what's happening, what is the iPad doing from a MIDI and audio standpoint, how does it interact and connect to the laptop and the samplers and whatever's on the table at that given point in time. So rather than type it all out and give you an essay to read or copy paste answers, I figured it's easy to just make a video, walk through the process in a little more detail, show you what's happening through examples and isolating sounds and whatnot. I think that will probably be easier to grasp. But even beyond that convenience factor, I think it's just worthwhile information to share. The iPad has really been a game changer for my workflow, and it's really consolidated a lot of things for me. I've been able to sell a lot of gear as a result of it, and it's just a really nice way to work that I really enjoy, cluing others into. And hopefully it can trigger a thought for you and maybe improve your own workflow going forward. So this won't be anything fancy. I've just got my camera here. I'm down in my studio with my gear on a table, and I'll just point and talk and demonstrate how I do what I do. And hopefully it's helpful. Feel free to reach out with any questions or comments if you still have any. More than happy to chat about this stuff and help you, on your own journey to a consolidated workflow like I've gotten into. So yeah, we'll get into it and see how it goes. Okay, so here's all my gear. Here's 95% of it at least. I have a Octatrack and a Digitact, two samplers that I like to use. They're off screen, and I obviously have a couple of small things like MIDI controllers and whatnot here and there, but by and large this is what I do all of my music with these days. The iPad, the laptop, and this interface. I can do everything I need to do, both writing as well as performing, with what you see here. Fits neatly into a backpack, and that's kind of a summary of my personal approach to all this. I've been on this journey of minimizing and streamlining my setup to such a degree over the years. I just hate the idea of excess power supplies and cables everywhere, and overly expensive things that only do one function. And I've worked really hard to find a setup that works in a streamlined, simple way. And this is kind of where I'm at right now with the iPad running the show. I think it's an incredible tool. I've played the game of modular Eurorack, and I really liked that. I enjoyed it, learned quite a bit from that process, but I think all things considered, when you factor in how expensive it is and a lot of other things around, just the difficulty of doing simple things like getting balanced gain staging correct, signals out of the box itself, and the size of the case and everything. It ended up not being for me. So I did really like the modularity of it though. So I've always been attracted to things that can do many things and are somewhat customizable in that sense. I really like that aspect of Eurorack, and that's why I think the iPad is kind of a natural fit for someone who is into that kind of stuff, and I'll show you why. This is a iPad Pro. It's the one with the M1 processor. I just have the 11-inch from 2021, I think it is. But yeah, it's an amazing tool. I'll show you a couple of the apps that I like to use. I have a couple ones that I go to all the time to make the music that I make, but this iPad is, for me, it's a MIDI sequencer, it's a MIDI controller, it's a looper, it's a sampler. It's basically you know, everything I've ever wanted in a music making setup in a very compact 11-inch square. And for me, it's incredible. So I'll walk through the the setup of my workflow there in just a bit. But before we start, I think it's important to mention the interface and audio side of things. This to me is the secret weapon of my whole setup, because I integrate so tightly the laptop and the iPad. This box in particular is extremely useful. It's the iConnectivity Audio 4C audio interface. It's fairly new, but even though the iPad is class compliant, you could plug any interface into it and it would automatically be recognized and work just fine. It's not complicated. Because I like to integrate my laptop into the setup too, this is the only interface I've found. If you know of any others, let me know, but it's the only one I've seen that has this feature here. So you see two USB ports. You can connect two computing devices. You can connect two iPhones, two iPads, an iPad and an iPhone, an iPad and a laptop, two laptops, whatever you want, and seamlessly send audio and MIDI between both of those devices. Even better, the second port on here actually delivers power out. So I plug my iPad into that outlet number 2, and it keeps my iPad charged through an entire recording session, through an entire performance. I never have to worry about dongles or keeping the iPad charged, because it automatically does it through this interface. It's just a really nice, convenient set of features on this in a pretty small box too. You can see also it has this USB host port. That's incredibly useful as well, because it will power up to 8 USB devices, MIDI keyboards, controllers, fader ports, whatever you want to plug in there, whether they're just on their own or connected to a hub. You can send the MIDI information from that to and from both of the devices that are connected to this. So by plugging in one keyboard controller, I can send that MIDI to both my iPad as well as the laptop. That's all configurable in the software. So, in addition to that, you've got the two MIDI DIN ports, so I can connect my Octatrack or my Digitact, both in and out MIDI through there. It also has 4 outputs, which is really nice. So you can configure a bus send in your DAW on your laptop, send that out to another hardware device through the 3rd and 4th outputs, in addition to the standard left-right mains. It's really nice to have 4 outs, and you also get 4 ins as well, all of them with 48-volt phantom power. It's a really nice feature set, and it doesn't sound like RME audio drivers or anything. It's not that high quality, but it's good enough for 99% of people, unless you're doing really insane stuff. I can't understand why you would need quality that's any higher than this. So definitely recommend taking a look at it. I think it's pretty cheap too. It's relatively inexpensive, at least in the world of pro audio. I think it runs for about $400, but definitely recommend taking a look at that. For me, it's a real game changer. Okay, so how do I set this up? Well, it's very simple. All I do, I plug the iPad through a USB-C cable directly into the interface. Like I said, on port 2 on this one, it provides a charge, which is really nice. So plug that in there, good to go. And then the laptop, same deal, just plug in the USB-C and it'll be recognized right away. Okay, so just fired it up, all good to go. both devices are connected to the same interface, so now at this point they're ready to send audio and MIDI back and forth between the two. And this is the software that comes with the interface. It's set up as kind of a matrix router, so you can define which ins and outs are going to which ports, and set things like the audio rate and all that stuff. Pretty useful. You can also create your own little headphone mix if you're monitoring. It's pretty easy to use software from iConnectivity. Okay, so here's the basic setup for performance and any kind of jamming that I'm doing, generally speaking. Here's the iPad connected to the interface. The laptop is also connected to the interface, and now they're sharing audio and MIDI through the iConnectivity software, which is great. I'm running Ableton Live. That was kind of my pandemic project, was to figure out how to make it work. I've wanted to dive in for years, and it's working out really nicely for me. I won't show the whole layout of my setup here. Generally speaking, I have a couple channels worth of contact instruments that I've designed, some pianos, some strings, some Omnisphere synths, just stuff for pads and the stuff that I make that you can hear in my music. I have a couple go-to patches that I sequence quite a bit. I also have a channel set up receiving the iPad audio, so I can process the iPad audio in Ableton Live. I can loop it, I can affect it. I can also send it back out through the hardware outs. Say I want to integrate my Octatrack into the setup, I can set this to go out to channel 3, 4, and send the audio out the back of the interface and into the Octatrack to mess with. But what I also do on every channel I have set up, I've set up a send in Ableton that sends the audio back to the iPad. So I can pull up, an app like Samplr, for instance, if I wanted to sample some audio from the laptop, I could easily do that as such. So you can see I've got the laptop audio coming back in here. Which is then available for me to, mess with however I want. It's really nice. So yeah, and then I have a channel full of reverb and delay, and then a channel full of like glitchier stutter effects and things like that. I have a MIDI controller that's mapped to all the macros for that, and that's a whole nother discussion. I don't intend to spend any time on that, but Ableton Live is great. That's the takeaway. So I think the easiest way to show you what I do here is to kind of just jam a little bit. I'll get something going. I'll make some sounds using the iPad, and then I'll kind of break it apart in terms of what I'm doing for MIDI sequencing, what DAW I'm running, other DAW options that you can use, and just some general, favorite apps that I like to use from time to time. So with that said, let's zoom in on the iPad so you can see that a little more clearly. Yeah, and we'll just see what happens here. Okay, cool. So that, like I said, is a typical setup for me. I actually pulled it straight from a live set I played in Baltimore a couple weeks ago with my brother Mike. We have a band called Gray Acres, and this was my setup for that show too. I just kind of had a couple select samples set up ready to go to mess with and loop and warp and stuff like that while Mike played live guitar over top of it. And I slipped in a couple of drum beats, just really kind of subtle, low-key stuff to drive the set along. And that's kind of how I approach a lot of my music in a live context, but obviously you can see the potential here to also take clips of that and record little snippets that you can work on later. So let me just explain the basics of the iPad setup specifically, and I'll kind of run through how I use this thing bit by bit. First things first, where to start? There's so much. This application that you see here running is called AUM. It's AUM, made by a developer called Kymatica. It's a wonderful app. I think it's far and away the most intuitive, immediate, flexible DAW in the iOS environment. You can see it's set up kind of like a mixer. You have the ability to create as many audio and MIDI tracks as your CPU can handle. So, I'm running all this stuff right now, including plugins from Moog, Fab Filter, their Pro Q EQ. I've got Eventide reverbs. I have an audio damage, granular delay, some inter-app audio plugins like Samplr and Borderlands. Both wonderful tools. But yeah, even with all that running, quite a bit of processing going on here. I'm only topping out at 37% CPU pretty steadily, and it never really spikes much beyond that. So it's a great, very stable application. There's another iOS DAW that I would highly recommend for anyone trying to get into this stuff. It's called Loopy Pro. Here it is in the way I have it set up. It is a supremely flexible DAW, and I'm still trying to get my arms around it in terms of how I want to set it up. But you can see you can set up as many of these looping playheads as you want, and you also have the ability to host plugins and audio tracks just like you do in AUM on its own little mixer here. And you can configure this so that, for instance, I have this set up as an Ableton Live control. I'm sending MIDI control over all the channels I was just playing there, including audio levels, sends, all kinds of stuff. It's basically a do-it-all system in one application. So definitely recommend checking it out. Like I said, I'm still trying to set it up the way that I will use it most often, and also just try to understand it a little bit better. But I think AUM is something that almost everyone can use right out of the gate. It's got the ability to sync tempo. It has Ableton Link. It can send a MIDI clock out to your hardware if you want. Let's see a couple other cool features here. This is really one of my favorite parts about it. You have the ability to route your MIDI in kind of a matrix mixer format. So every MIDI control sequence that I've created here, I can send that out to any other application, any other input on the interface. It's all right there. It's extremely easy to program and to send MIDI where you want to send it. So with that said, I almost always have a MIDI channel set up where I've got only MIDI apps in use. I'll run down the ones I have right here. Fugue Machine is a tool I really love to use. It kind of drives the show a lot of the time. You can just sketch out little patterns and sequences here on the playhead, and it has 4 different simultaneous playheads moving at any given time. So let me just start this up here and I can show you what's happening. So as you can see, I've got it set up in the key of F at a minor scale, so I can sketch out notes that correspond to that. I can change the octave that it's playing at. So each time it comes up on a note, you can very quickly and easily kind of run through the octave, and it's really fun for a performance tool in that respect. You can set the direction the playheads go, the tempo that they run at, this bar that it starts on. You can also set the octave and the pitch and semitones if you want, as well as velocity. So I almost always have this running. I kind of flip it on and off as I go. If I want to add some notes to fill out sounds, it's a really easy way to do that. And I have it routed right now. It's sending MIDI notes to my Samplr plugin here. I'll touch on Decent Sampler in just a bit. I also have it triggering notes on the Moog Model D synth. So, you know, the underlying bass tones that you heard there were all coming from Model D right here. Highly recommend the Moog apps. They sound incredible. They're pretty affordable too, and I think that's one of my favorite things about the iPad platform in general. You have really pro quality sounding effects and plugins and instruments for very little. This FabFilter Pro Q, for instance, I think the laptop version of the software runs for something like $150, $200. I bought the iPad version for $30. So you've got all the FabFilter stuff, Pro C, Pro L, Pro Q, for a fraction of the cost of just one elsewhere. A lot of this stuff is free too. I know a lot of people love the Eventide stuff. Some people will go out and buy a $500 H9 pedal or a $300 Space reverb pedal, and here you can get a Eventide reverb for $20. Here's the black hole algorithm that I really love. But I digress. So back to where we were with Fugue Machine. It's running its 4 playheads of MIDI notes and controlling the Moog app as well as this little piano plugin. So Decent Sampler, wonderful, wonderful app. Highly recommend if you're going to get into the iPad game. This is the closest thing that we have to Contact from Native Instruments. It's kind of at this point the only similar sample-based playback device. There's lots of great free libraries in the Decent Sampler format on the Piano Book website. I'll link to it in the description, but pianobook.co.uk has so many free plugins. It's shocking, really, that these guys put out the quality of sample libraries that they do and don't even charge anything for it. So it's a little tricky to get up and running, but once you've got it in place, it's really nice. They're great piano and string libraries. So in my case, I'm using Fugue Machine to sequence this upright piano. Turn the volume up, sorry. So you can see I've got it running through this great delay from Audio DAWs called Other Desert Cities. It's being split apart into little grains, an octave up. There's the raw sound. Mix all the way up. Get some nice little shimmering effects there. But yeah,
yeah, I mean, Decent Sampler, I have it set to run a piano right now, but there are so many great libraries for other instruments too. Sometimes if I'm performing with just the iPad, it's not uncommon for me to have 3 to 4 instances of Decent Sampler running with a piano, strings, what have you. There's some really great experimental libraries out there. I definitely recommend checking that app out. So, in addition to sequencing those instruments, I also have Fugue Machine running some MIDI notes out to these 2 other sequencing apps. They're both from, what is the company called? Yeah, I can overdub that into the video. But Chordjam and Riffer. These are 2 really great kind of generative sequencing apps. I have it set so that every playhead in Fugue Machine is hitting Chordjam and Riffer. And what that does is when a note comes in, it will generate a random chord within the key and scale type that you set. And you can set it to endlessly shuffle the number of voices, the octave of the voice, the velocity of each note, the time separating each of the notes. It's really powerful and really flexible. There's a crazy number of chord types that you can pick from. For someone like me who's not really a piano player, it's really nice to have this come up with just quick ideas, and you can easily catch these, sample them later, loop them, whatever. It's just a nice way to come up with voicings of chords that you wouldn't think of on your own. Sounds really nice. So I've got the output of Chordjam running back into the computer over USB MIDI. So those chords are being sent and playing my contact instruments in live. Here's one of them. These strings from landforms it's playing, and then also some native instruments, felt pianos, and the Lecco piano from Felt Instruments. So then, yeah, I can, send all those to my effects and buses in Ableton, and I have a controller set up to do that sometimes, but yeah. So it's nice to have that option. Let me pause that real quick. Riffer is a similar tool where you feed it a sound, or you can just let it run on its own. It doesn't matter. You'll feed it a chord or a note, and it will generate its own little melody, 1-note melody for you according to the tempo you've got set, the key you have set. It will endlessly shuffle through single notes and melodies, and it's just a nice way to add little lines of harmony and melody over top of what you're playing. So I actually have the output from Riffer sequencing the piano here within the iPad. So those little 1-note blips that you hear, all those notes are coming from Riffer. Every time a Fugue Machine note is played, it's being sent to Riffer, and this just runs along its merry way and triggers notes every now and then. So yeah, just a nice, fun way to trigger some sequences and use this iPad as a sequencer. There are so many sequencing apps out there. I don't really have time to get into all of them, but there are some really powerful ones that do some of the probability and conditional stuff that you might like about the Elektron sequencers too. You can get all the same stuff in iOS world too. Pianoroll is another really good one. Shout out to this one for anyone looking for like a more traditional Pianoroll type of sequencer with probability, swing, tempo, multiple layers of stuff that you can add there. It's really nice. Okay, so this device here, it's called LK. This is an app from a company called Imaginando, a great company. They make a lot of nice plugins, both for Mac, PC, as well as iOS. This one is set up to be an Ableton Live controller. So when you run it within AUM, you don't get all the features of that, but I just like having a little on-screen keyboard mod wheel. I've got the mod wheel set so that as I slide it up, it opens up a couple extra layers in my contact instrument over on the laptop. So I have this set up as a way to kind of play keyboard and play notes and chords here and there in Ableton Live directly from my iPad, and I use this as like just a quick and easy keyboard sometimes. You've also got MIDI pads with chords and arpeggiation. You know, you can do all that stuff. And it's, yeah, it's really nice. But like I said, the real value in that one is when you run it on its own, you will instantly, oh shoot. Well, normally you'd see all your clips and mixer levels and device macros. It all pops up on its own, and it's, you know, effectively like an iPad version of the push. It's really nice. So if you're a live user, it's definitely worth your time to check that out. So anyway, that's kind of what I do in the MIDI side of things. Because I like sampling and looping so much, that's such a big part of how I make my music. There are a couple of really nice apps to do that. I still think the standard by which you have to judge everything else these days is the app called Samplr. And that's SAMPLR, no E. But you've got the ability to load in your own samples here. You can play them back on a touch interface, which is just really nice from a performance aspect. You can kind of do exactly what you've got in your mind just by dragging your fingers over the screen. You can loop stuff with the little infinity button there. It's got some effects over here like a filter, distortion, delay, reverb. Honestly, this is one of the best quick, easy sampling tools that I've ever found. I think it's been out since the first iPads were available, and it's still incredible. I think it's still, like I said, the standard for me in terms of sampling and looping. And I also have my Ableton Live sessions set up so that one of my sends goes directly out through USB audio into the iPad, so I can catch audio that's happening. I can run my MIDI sequencers on the iPad, drive Ableton Live, and then the output from Live will come back into the iPad. And I can catch that audio here. Just oops. There's some pretty crazy stuff in here, but for me, it's the easiest way to sample live and just catch stuff on the fly to warp with and mess with in a performance setting. I also really like the Borderlands Granular app. You can see it's designed around loading or recording live input samples into the app, and then you kind of design these these floating orbs with a bunch of different effects like probability, overlap, voices. It's a granular synthesizer, so you set up like the parameters of the grains and the playback that you want. You can set pitch from an octave up to 4 octaves down or something crazy like that. And so it's really easy to come up with some wild sounds. I have 2 samples loaded in here, a piano and strings, and you can hear what that sounds like. It's fully wet through Eventide reverbs here, the black hole reverb. But yeah, nice way to get some cool granular textures there through the Borderlands app. One other thing to note here, for the percussion and beat making stuff, like I said before, there's so many apps for iOS. It's kind of hard to talk about all of them. I'm sure you can just search the App Store and find something else, but one that I really enjoy using is this one called Patterning. It's a really nice, really good app for beat making and drum machine purposes. Let me get this going so you can hear it. Doing its thing, but it's built around this wheel, so for every piece of the drum kit you kind of draw in your notes that you want to hear, and this can set up the velocity of the note, the attack, hold, decay. You can tune them accordingly. You can also set the direction that these patterns play in, so you can have it just continually cycle around the circle, or you can make it go backward. You can make it swing like a pendulum. It's kind of cool, all the different things you can do. But it's very easy to control in a live setup too, because it's quite easy to ride the reverb, delay, distortion, and kind of play the effects. You've also got a mixer here to mix in each element of the drum kit, and you can cycle through these patterns really quickly and in time with the MIDI clock from AUM. So this will always stay in sync and stay on time, and you can switch between your patterns. You can see I've got a few set up here, and I can just toggle between them, or just play a whole sequence that you set up if you really want to. What's nice about this is it's kind of like Digitact in a way. If you're familiar with the Elektron stuff, you can load your own samples and trigger them that way. You can see I've got my own drum samples loaded up here. All you have to do is go to the file section and open up your samples. There are a ton of free kits that you can download here. You see I've downloaded a couple that other people have built, and they sound really good. Another really nice thing about patterning, one of several other nice things, is you can export each. Let me stop this for a second. You can export each of the pieces of the drum kit and the pattern that it's playing as an Ableton live clip. So you can export out the sequence, design your beat here, say you're on the plane or train or bus, whatever, and you're sketching out a beat. You can export them as live clips, load that into Ableton later, and kind of have that on record and on file to trigger for sets in the future, or if you're sketching out songs or whatever. It's a really nice way to work. I've actually done that a couple times now. But yeah, it's a really nice app. It's also available on the iPhone. Let me pull that up. Patterning for iPhone. See, you've got the same wheel. So quite nice to have. If you're on the go, you can maintain some continuity between the stuff you're working on iPad or iPhone. Bring that over to the computer later, chop it up and sequence and arrange it accordingly. It's quite nice. I think the final thing worth mentioning about AUM and really iOS in general as a platform, it's extremely configurable for MIDI control. So almost every app that you see or that you download, you'll notice that there's a MIDI learn section. So you can quite easily assign controls over any of these parameters in any of the apps to whatever controller you might be using. And it's quite easy to set it up as a performance tool. So you don't have to use your hands for everything or a pencil like I'm using. You can set up a controller of your choice to use, and that'll work just fine. One of the ways I really like to work is with the Digitact. So lots of people have favorite hardware controllers or hardware sequencers. And the great thing about Digitact is that, it's USB class compliant. So you can plug the iPad directly into the Digitact. It'll recognize the Digitact right away. You can send stuff out through the balanced outputs on Digitact. You can collect what's coming into the Digitact and mix and mix and loop and sample and do all that. So the Digitact and the iPad make a really nice pair. I use them together all the time. And the fact that you've got 8 MIDI tracks on Digitact, you can set up, LFO outs and CC controls. What I do sometimes is I map one iOS instrument to each MIDI channel on the Digitact. And then I've got 8 rotary knobs to control the parameters of each of those instruments. I've also got LFOs that I can send over USB audio to the iPad, and vice versa. You can send MIDI control from the iPad, LFOs and whatnot through apps over to the Digitact just through USB audio. I also like to use the Octatrack. I don't have it handy here, so I can't pull it into the picture, but as we all know, that only has the MIDI DIN access. So what you can do is just get a Bluetooth MIDI adapter, and there are actually quite a few things you can do to control the Octatrack from iPad over Bluetooth MIDI if you wanted to. There's even an app called, what is it called? Manifold. That's it. So you can control the Octatrack from this app over Bluetooth MIDI if you wanted to. They make a really powerful pair. They've got varying degrees of randomization of all the parameters on screen. It's got, control over the mixer, over the effects. Quite a nice app that I definitely recommend for iPad if you're an Octatrack user and looking to integrate it into the setup. You should definitely look at that. But yeah, there's quite a few ways that you can use the iPad with an Elektron instrument or other hardware. What I've also done in the past is I've used the Digitact with an iPhone. You can plug an iPhone into the USB port on the Digitact, and then you've got a really tiny, portable but powerful sampling kit, and then you can record your output from the Digitact onto the iPhone in pretty high quality, just over a USB to Lightning connection, and that'll easily slip into a backpack if you need to travel. So great way to work. All the Elektron stuff works quite well with iPad and vice versa. Couple other things worth calling out. Within AUM, you have the ability to route the audio out to any available interface output, but also you can set up these little mix sends where, if you wanted to stack just a mix bus with a bunch of different effects. I have this one set up to be a pretty beat up tape sound with a great app called Chow Tape by Chow DSP. It's modeled on an old Sony TC reel-to-reel machine, but it's still one of the most realistic, best tape emulators I've ever found. It's free. It's available for iPad, iPhone, as well as Mac and PC. So you can download that one for free on any platform and use it. But as you can see, I've got this Samplr output routed to this mix bus. I can really go to town with destroying this through the tape machine. And that's a lot of fun. This app here, too, is a tape delay from Imaginando as well. It's called K7D. It's a really quick, easy-to-use tape delay with some LFOs that you can assign to various parameters. And it's just a really nice-sounding tape delay. It's got nice warble and modulation on it that is easy to fill up a patch. And I kind of ride this feedback knob quite a bit and just pull in a bunch of wild sounding oscillations and feedback for texture. It's a nice way to build intensity during a song. Yeah, so that's that. Couple other apps that I think are worth mentioning. Apesoft, they build a really nice sounding electric piano. So if you like the Rhodes sound, that's a good sounding electric piano. But then they also have this high density granular sampler that does really wild stuff. So, well worth your time to check out their stuff. Also from Imaginando, they build a really nice granular synthesizer called Frames. It's spelled FRMS. But you've got the ability to record live or load in up to 4 different samples. And play them back with, all these different parameter setups. And they have a whole modulation matrix, so you can route modulation and LFOs to all kinds of parameters and make it sound pretty wild. In tone, so that's a really nice way to add texture as well. But yeah, those are a couple of the go-tos that I always end up using. Let's see, what else is there to talk about here? I guess, yeah, by and large, I think that's kind of the gist of it. For me, the iPad is like the looper, sequencer, controller, sampler, effect box, recording tool of my dreams. I've always hoped for something like this. You can customize and build whatever you want, really. One other thing I should add here, within the AUM app, you have the ability, you can see the R record enable on each channel. You can record every single channel, get the audio from each one, and it will be captured in whatever, quality rate you want in this great app called Audioshare. It's a really nice way to organize your files and samples. So everything's available. You can import from Dropbox, upload to Dropbox, and then also it's kind of the go-to way to load in audio and samples into other apps like AUM if you wanted to set up a backing track and just, oops, wrong app. If you wanted to load up a backing track, you can do that. Just set up the file player and pull in an audio file from Audioshare, and it'll be ready to go, and you can play it. You can also use it to load in audio samples into apps like Samplr, for instance. But just a nice file organization tool. But really, AUM can be like a full-fledged DAW if you wanted it to. You can capture input from any of these instruments playing within the app, anything you've got plugged into your interface, whatever the case might be. It's pretty flexible and very, very capable. So I think that does it. I'll stop there before this goes on forever, but hopefully that was helpful. Gives you some insight as to what's possible. I'm just barely scratching the surface here, but it's kind of the gist of my basic setup I use the most often. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. Feel free to reach out with any comments or questions, and I'm happy to answer. Thanks for watching.